Line 5, Acorn Productions here, Mr. Blair, talking about time period 5, transitioning from time period 4, pulling some of the context forward. So, the idea that starts coming through at this time period is manifest destiny, and this is not really going to be very easy to read. So, American exceptionalism, Western expansion, and a sense of destiny. I'm just going to kind of explain it to you because it wasn't written very well to begin with. One, American exceptionalism. You see this begin way back in the day in 1620 when John Winthrop talks about the Puritan experiment being a city upon a hill, which had nothing to do with a hill or really a city. It was a community for the world to watch, practicing a perfect form of religion in his eyes. You run that forward to the American Revolution, and at Lexington Concord, there's a shot heard around the world. Why? Because the gun was so loud? No, not because the gun was so loud. Because America is independent, or there was an independence fight? Not really. I mean, countries had been trying to split off from one for another throughout many parts of history. It was the idea that there was a shot fired for republicanism, that the citizens, the people, were standing up and fighting for something. So this American exceptionalism grows into the idea that more America, more awesome. And it manifests in the United States with the idea of manifest destiny, but also in Western expansion. So in Western expansion, it fits into the American dream vision as well. So if things aren't going very well for you right here, instead of having to deal with bad times or having restrictions on your opportunities, move out west and try it again. Have a new start out west. And so the American dream gets tied up in this. Jefferson buys the Louisiana Purchase with his dream for an agrarian republic. And all of these ideas get this kind of mythic identity built up by the late 1830s and into the 1840s of a destiny, that it was America's destiny to spread out over the entire continent and bring the blessings of liberty and democracy everywhere they went. And it gets this flavor of religion, that it's a God-given destiny, that it is the duty of Americans to fulfill it. And there's a contradiction in there, because the expansion of liberty for many is done at the expense of many. So manifest destiny is kind of a justification of moving west. This is my drawing, and don't get too excited about how darn good I am at states. I'm just copying. I'm just tracing. But in the 1830s and in the 1840s, Americans start migrating west in great numbers. Initially in the 1820s, the Santa Fe Trail to begin trading into Spain and then Mexico, as Mexico became an independent nation. In the 1820s and into the 1830s, going down the Natchez Trace from Tennessee down into Texas, originally going to Mexico to settle Texas. This led to a conflict in the 1830s as Texas asked settlers to be Catholic and not house slaves. So the American Texans went down there to be Protestants, and they brought their slaves with them. And this ultimately led to a clash and fight, and the Texans, who were Americans living in Texas, won a war with Mexico called the Texas Revolution, or the Texas War for Independence. Now, this map, my discussion, my placing the timing of this here, and what I'm about to say is going to help create more confusion. But the Texas War for Independence leads to the creation of a 10-year Lone Star Republic. It was called the Lone Star Republic as kind of a, hey, America, won't you take us in? And there was a debate over whether this would be good neighborly things to do, to take land from one republic, Mexico, and acquire it for the United States. And also tensions beginning of the major theme of this time period of history. The major theme of time period 5 is that Western expansion heightens sectional tensions over the issue of slavery. And this story is pretty linear. We are going west. It is triggering debates about whether slavery should be in the places and what it means if a state or a territory becomes free or slave in terms of the stability of the nation. It's the one-note story of this whole time period. So unlike Jacksonian, we've got one theme. Western expansion heightens sectional tension over the issue of slavery. And as we come to 1844, it's really the Manifest Destiny election. James K. Polk of Tennessee is elected, and he's running on Manifest Destiny. He's Polk the Purposeful. The United States should spread out west. He runs a war campaign over Oregon, 54-40 or fight, but doesn't really want to push for Northern Territory. He's got his eyes on Southern Territory a little bit more, and he's ready to expand the country westward either way, whether it's California, Oregon, or Texas. Now, after he is elected, but before he's inaugurated, President John Tyler annexes Texas, and Polk puts troops down on the border, and there's a disputed area that Mexico was saying that our boundary was about here, and we are saying our boundary is down here. That's a pretty big difference, several hundred miles. And Polk asked Mexico to sell California. I know, I started with Texas, and I moved to California, and at an area that he wanted the United States to acquire. And when Mexico said no, he put troops on the Texas border. Ultimately, this led to a skirmish, which led to an accusation by the United States that Mexico had shed blood on American soil. This war was similar to the War of 1812, that the different parties didn't agree on it. The Democratic Party, which was more for Western expansion, said this is a war that must be fought. And the Whigs, led by freshman Congressman Abraham Lincoln, including freshman Congressman Abraham Lincoln, wanted to investigate the story a little bit more to see whether there should be a fight. And another member of the House of Representatives from Pennsylvania said, hey, this looks like a gambit to try to expand slave territory. You guys say it's not about slavery, so how about this? Any territory that we acquire from the war will not have slavery on it. This was the Wilmot Proviso that passed in the House because the majority of people in the American population were Northern, but failed to pass the Senate because there was a balance of slave and free states in the Senate. This represents the sectional split that immediately is happening right at the beginning of the Mexican War. The United States then, within 2 years, defeated Mexico and acquired about half of the land that was Mexican, which is north of the modern-day Mexican border, including California, Utah, Nevada, Mexico, and Arizona. All right. Well, I have to back up a little bit. As people were going west in the 1840s, they first went along the Oregon Trail, the northern trail around here, went through the St. Louis area, Independence, Missouri, and St. Louis, took a trail all the way out to Oregon and began farming. They reported back wonderful stories about the farmland. As soon as the Mexican War ended, people were using this trail, and they were going to Oregon and California and other areas. And the war ended in 1848. A European settler in Mexico named John Sutter discovered gold in 1848. The United States not only defeated Mexico, but the year after the war ended in California, there was the California Gold Rush, which created my favorite football team, the 49ers. But in 1849, people came from all over the world, flooded to California, and tried to pursue the fortunes that were in the gold fields in the Sierra Nevadas. So, kind of insult to injury to Mexico, but also the beginning of a more intensive story in the effects of the Mexican War, as almost instantly, with all these people going into the new territory of California, California had enough population to submit itself as a state to the Union. And so in 1850, when California submitted itself as a state to the Union, it submitted a constitution that said California would be a free state. Now, this triggers a conflict which is deferred but not resolved. Immediately, the southern states were beginning to fear, especially since a large part of this state was below the Missouri Compromise line, and it looked like it should have been a slave state to many Southerners. California, applying through the vote of its people as a free state, put the South a little bit backwards in what their goals were out of this war. And so the big three congressmen, Henry Clay, the compromiser, Daniel Webster, the voice of the North, and John C. Calhoun, the voice of the South, did their last hurrah. They'd been in Congress for 30 years. They each had national aspirations of some way during the time period, and they each brought their own flavor to this. Henry Clay is really the person that's proposing the compromise here, and he is going to hand over the baton of compromising to Stephen Douglas. The compromise position is popular sovereignty. Let's stop making this be a national issue. If you want to avoid war, stop making it be a national issue. Take it out of the hands of the national government and let the people of a given territory decide about the status of their territory, free or slave. And then after it's a state, let the people of the states decide about the status of the territory, free or slave. This was the most likely attempt to hold the Union together without war, and ultimately that didn't work. John C. Calhoun, looking at this, was saying it's very obvious that the future of the slave states is as a minority in a democracy, and that guarantees, while the Compromise of 1850 was something, that guarantees would be needed to have the South feel comfortable inside this union. And this is John C. Calhoun, who had advocated the theory of nullification over the tariff of 1828, and that led to a conflict with Andrew Jackson that was resolved with Henry Clay's compromise tariff in 1833. So South Carolina is leading the vanguard of not feeling comfortable in this union, and is really saying the South is not protected in this union, that the institution of slavery, which is vital to their economy, needs to advance into more lands, and it also needs to advance into more states so that the South's voice could have a say in national politics. So while John C. Calhoun accepted the Compromise of 1850 near his death, he did not feel very good about it. He wanted more. He advocated a series of plans, including 2 presidents, to make the South feel protected inside the Union. Daniel Webster, who was a strong Union man and the best orator of his day, gave the famed 7th of March speech, in which he said how important it was to ratify this Compromise of 1850 and give in to some of the Southern demands, to try to meet in the middle, because the Union was the most important thing of all. And this led Daniel Webster to have spent his last fame in the North, as after the ratification of the Compromise of 1850 was so vilified that Daniel Webster is seen to have betrayed his region, the North. So it's kind of Daniel Webster is a bit the martyr of this story, as he convinced with his oratory skills Northern congressmen to support the compromise. So as we wrap up, the Compromise of 1850 was a 4-part compromise that didn't work very well. Everything we see in the 1850s is going to be another attempted compromise that leads to greater conflict. Conflict should not be the result of compromise, but that is what it is in this case. It was going to admit California as a free state to the Union. It was going to have all of the territories acquired in the Mexican War be resolved by popular sovereignty, which was seen as betrayal of the anti-slavery position. I'll get to that in a little bit later. It was to get rid of the slave trade, but not slavery, in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And it was to get stronger enforcement of a fugitive slave law. So the Fugitive Slave Act that came out of the Compromise of 1850 gave much stronger powers for slave catchers to operate in northern states and return slave property to southern slave owners. This too backfired tremendously, as many Northerners who didn't like the idea of slavery but didn't see it affecting their lives and saw it as a business not affecting them, then became abolitionists, or at least anti-slavery proponents, as they saw perceived injustices in the capture of runaway slaves and return to the South. It's an injustice to someone who sees slavery as a bad thing anytime someone's returned to slavery. There was also inequities in the system that seemed to not give African Americans, whether they were free or runaway slaves, an adequate role in the process to prove their situation. So the Fugitive Slave Act was more tinder to the fire that was creating disunion. So compromise leads to conflict instead of resolution of problems in this time period. I will see you with more 1850 stuff in the next video.